Wakey wakey, good morning, you bang on time for AM Live Breakfast Show. And I'm glad that yes, you've joined us today on In the Market, where we shall be looking at the state of the economy, what is happening in the market, and our panelists will be joining us much later in the course of the program. They're running late, and we'll be trying to also try to actually drill deeper and see what is happening, especially with the Public Service Commission pronouncement on the pensionable staff that now moving forward when they're going to hire, this will be on contractual basis and not permanent and pensionable terms. That also will be a part of our discussion this morning. Also, we'll be looking at the new development as far as stemming the waging bill is concerned. That is in line with the pension, and also in the oil sector. And also we shall be looking at what is happening, especially when it comes to the Lamu coal plant that now is in limbo, amongst a raft of other stories this morning. But first, the good, the bad, and the ugly in our dailies. We begin with the Daily Nation. This is what is headlining the front page of the Daily Nation this morning. Police turn to FBI in Ruto murder saga. That is what we have as a splash today. Kinoti says he won't rush to interview DP over claims that his life is in danger. Kinoti scrambles to unravel assassination claims involving CSs. On Monday, 3 cabinet secretaries from central Kenya were summoned to record statements at the Directorate of Criminal Investigations after a letter appeared online alleging that they met at Hotel Lamada in Nairobi to plot how to assassinate DP Ruto. The three, Peter Munya, Cecily Kariuki, and John Musheru, have owned up to the meeting but denied the murder claim, saying the talks were only about development in the Mount Kenya region. This is a puzzle. Detectives say they will reach out to US-based crime busters to determine the authenticity of a mystery letter alleging that some cabinet secretaries met to plot how to assassinate Deputy President ahead of the 2022 general election. This story continues on page 4 of the Daily Nation this morning. Also on the front page of the Daily Nation, 200 billion shillings coal project stopped. The National Environment Tribunal has revoked a license given to Amu Power Company to establish a coal plant in Lamu. It says the National Environment Management Authority issued the permit illegally, as the engineering plans were not presented for verification, the public was not involved in the design, and the Climate Change Act was ignored. The tribunal said the license was generic and was not specific to the project. This story continues on the page 4 of the business of the Daily Nation today. You can see also a related picture. This is environmental activists demonstrating in Nairobi against government plans to build a 200 billion shillings coal power plant in Lamu. And as I've mentioned also, we shall be discussing this with our panelists much later in the course of the program this morning. Still on the front page of the Daily Nation, MP in trouble over head talk. Stara MP Charles Njagua Kanyi will today face charges of incitement to violence for threatening foreigners running businesses in Nairobi. This story continues on page 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. And also on top there, new curriculum, the unanswered questions. 6 months since the 2663 education system was rolled out, it's still not clear how learners will be examined, whether lower secondary will be hosted in primary schools, and if teachers are prepared for the changes. Also, you can follow this story on page 10 of today's Daily Nation. Let's move on and we'll see what we have on the front page of the Standard. And this is what we have on the front page of the Standard this morning. Still loading. Well, it's still loading. I hope so. Let me try and do that again. I don't know why it's drawing a blank, but this is the challenges of technologies early in the morning. Let me try and do that again. Well, I hope it will not really act on me and act upon me and embarrass me this morning. All right, that is the Standard acting up this morning. Let's see if we can try and see the Star as the Standard is trying to load up. This is what we have on the front page of the Star. Ruto death claim. 20 PSs, CEOs to record statements. That is what we have as a splash today. DP was yet to record his statement with DCI by last evening. Sources say President Kenyatta may have to intervene and have his deputy tell DCI what he knows about alleged assassination plot. This story continues on page 2 of the Star this morning. Also, there is a standalone picture here, and this is Starehe MP Charles Njagua is arrested by DCI officers at Parliament buildings over his alleged xenophobic remark against foreign investors. And of course, this has also drawn a spat between Kenya and Tanzania. And of course, you can read all the gritty details inside the Star this morning. Still on the front page of the Star, revealed how pathologist Njue stole body parts. A government pathologist and 2 morgue attendants yesterday testified in a case where a former chief government pathologist is charged with stealing a man's heart. Meru Level 5 pathologist Dr. Scholastica Kimani told Meru Senior Resident Magistrate Evans Mbicha that Dr. Moses Njue disappeared with the heart and kidney of Benedict Karau. And you can follow the story on page 26 of the Star this morning. Maribe Joey case, Monica may have lived with a man. This is what the defense is saying. Defense lawyers yesterday argued that there was a male adult living with slain businesswoman Monica Kimani. Professor Hassan Nandua pointed to men's clothes and accessories found at Monica's house in Lamuria Gardens. This story is tucked away on page 7 of the Star this morning. Also, MPs split over Jaguar's remarks on foreigners. MPs yesterday engaged in heated debate over the way Tanzania has treated Kenya's majority leader, Eden Duale, condemned remarks by Starehe MP Charles Njagua and insisted that Tanzania was behaving badly. You can follow the story on page 7 of the Star this morning. Let me see if we have the Standard back. Not yet. Still loading up. I'll try and also maybe to retrieve that so you can see what it is holding for us this morning. The Standard. Well, there seems to be a problem with the Standard this morning. I'll show you the hard copy. But we can continue with the People Daily. And this is what is on the front page of the People Daily this morning. Now Kibicho reports Ruto to police. This is a new twist. Internal Security PS, one of those mentioned in a yet-to-be authenticated letter alleging plots to assassinate the DP, files harassment complaint against country's second in command. This story continues on page 4 and 5 of the People Daily. Maybe, interestingly, we can head over there and see what it says. It says that Ruto is harassing me, Kibicho tells detectives. Interior PS declines to record statement on DP assassination claim and instead lodges complaints with investigators. Interior Principal Secretary Karanja Kibiso, whose name has featured prominently in the alleged plot to assassinate Deputy President William Ruto, has lodged a complaint with the Directorate of Criminal Investigations citing harassment by the country's second most powerful politician. The PS made the complaint on a day that the detectives investigating the assassination claims raided Cyber Cafe on the junction of Magadi and Langata roads, where it is suspected the alleged letter at the center of the assassination claims was authored. Detectives are said to be pursuing the suspect behind the letter, and you can read all the gritty details here on page 4 of the People Daily this morning. Deputy President William Ruto reportedly called the Directorate of Criminal Investigations to complain that a group of public officials under the leadership of Interior PS Karanja Kibiso have been holding meetings whose agenda is to plot his assassination. But Kibicho tells the DCI that the Deputy President and his allies have been harassing him and making public statements that make it difficult for him to perform his duties. This is a story on page 4 of the People Daily, and of course you can pick up that particular free copy of the People Daily as well to follow the story. Also, Jaguar's toxic tongue lands him in trouble. You know all the details, but you have also this still tucked away on page 6 of the People Daily this morning. Let's continue and see what we do have also on the front page of Taifa Leo, and this is what you're waking up to this morning on the front page of Taifa Leo. Jaguar achafua hewa Tanzania. It says bunge la Tanzania lajadili mbunge wa Starehe, polisi wamtia mbaroni kwa kutisha wageni. That is what we have on the front page of the Star. This is how it looks. All right, Kiswahili kuzungumzwa Misri leo. That is on Sporty 21 and 24. And also koti yaelezwa jinsi daktari alivyobeba roho figo ya maiti. And this is all about the story of the pathologist who is illegally harvesting organs from corpses. You can follow the story on page 2 of the Taifa Leo this morning. There is a standalone picture here. And this is, it says, wanahabari na wafuasi wa mbunge wa Starehe Charles Njagwa wakitoroka baada ya polisi katika kituo cha Nairobi area kurushia gesi ya machozi. And this is how it was yesterday. That is what we have on the front page of Taifa Leo. Business Daily is up next, and this is what you're waking up to on the front page of the Business Daily today. Now, NSC companies spend 2.7 billion shillings on staff layoffs. It's all about retrenchment. Annual financial reports of 8 firms reveal the extent of job losses. 8 Nairobi Security Exchange listed firms spent 2.7 billion shillings to lay off workers last year as others cut their employee numbers through natural attrition. Disclosures in the company's annual reports have shown this. The staff redundancies raise queries on the ability of Kenya's economic growth to generate quality jobs for millions of unemployed youths. The economy grew by 6.3% last year, but some analysts have said this was not felt in some sectors. The economy rebounded last year from a growth rate of 4.9% in 2017, but companies continue to shed off workers, citing a difficult business environment. Banks dominated the list of job cuts through early retirement schemes and natural attrition, reflecting the increasing shift to digital banking, which requires less staff numbers. The annual report shows that 6 listed banks, that disclosed their employees' numbers let go nearly 1,600 staff in 1 year. You can follow this story on page 4 of the Business Daily this morning, and we shall be looking at this as well with our panelists. What does this portend for the market? Why, if we have all these listed companies also retrenching, and the flip side of this is we have also these banks showing us the figures of some of the CEOs as well who are taking away huge bonuses. And yet this is what is happening also in their companies. And in light of the Capital Markets Authority's that is corporate governance codes, it says that, of course, if our companies performing dismally, and of course we've talked this more and more on this particular show, then also the CEO's pay should reflect the company's performance. If there is a downward trend as far as profits making is concerned, then also he should get a cut from his salaries. But they're all listed here on the front page of the Business Daily. Some of the companies from Britam, Stanchart, NBK, Barclays, KCB, Bamburi, Shelter Afrique, BAT, Total. And you can follow the story on page 4 of the Business Daily this morning. Also, that standalone picture that we had on the front page of Taifa Leo is also on the front page of the Business Daily, taking cover. And this were journalists taking cover yesterday after that the tear gas were lobbed at them. Nairobi in list of 100 most expensive cities. Sustained climb in the prices of goods and services has pushed Nairobi back into the list of 100 most expensive cities in the world, making it a more costly location for expatriate workers. The Kenya capital leaped 26 places to become the world's 97th most expensive city last year, according to a mass cost of living report released yesterday. The story continues on page 4 of the Business Daily this morning. We shall be discussing this also with our panelists much later in the course of the program. Also, Kenya in diplomatic spat with Dar over small traders is another story you want to follow inside the Business Daily. A trade dispute between Nairobi and Dar es Salaam escalated yesterday after MPs from both parliaments issued threats following allegedly xenophobic utterances attributed to Starehe MP Charles Njagwa, who was arrested yesterday. Follow the story on page 2 of the Business Daily, and this actually is a related picture to that story. It's not a standalone picture. You have the story there on page 2 of the Business Daily today. Looking on the ticker, Liberty sells off current property. Liberty Holdings has sold its residential house in Nairobi's Karen estate to property developer Africa Rate for 125 million shillings, the second such disposal for the firm amid declining returns on some of its real estate investments. You can follow the story on page 7 of the Business Daily. Today's digit is $1.1 billion budget. This is budget for the pipeline that will ferry crude to the coast. This also is tucked away on page 7 of the Business Daily. Efforts to revive Parethrem face financial hurdle. The once lucrative Parethrem sector remains in a quandary despite initiatives to revive it. A new assessment report by Nakuru County shows this, and the story continues on page 12 and 13 of the Business Daily. Eurobond yield decline opens door for debt. Investors in the international debt market have significantly lowered their risk rating of Kenyan bonds, opening room for the Treasury to borrow more aggressively at friendlier price. You can follow the story on page 19 of the Business Daily this morning. A quick look at what we do have also across the borders. We can go to Tanzania and pick up now the Citizen, and this is what is the splash on the front page of the Citizen. Acacia rejects Barrick buyout attempt. Acacia Mining rejects the takeover bid and accuses its main shareholder of taking advantage of problems it has helped inflame to buy the company at a knockdown price. This story continues on page 2 of the Citizen. In Tanzania, Kenya MP seized over xenophobic tirade is also another story on the front page of the Citizen. In Tanzania, Kenyan MP Charles Kanyi and Jaguar, who caused a storm by threatening to eject foreigners, including Tanzanians and Ugandans, from his Tare constituency in Nairobi. He was arrested yesterday by the police. The MP, a former musician who is popularly known as Jaguar, was arrested outside Parliament in Nairobi as pressure mounted over threats he issued regarding foreign traders. You can follow the story on page 2 of the Citizen. In Tanzania, also forex dealers are back in the game is a story you need to follow also on page 3 of the Citizen. New bill aims to improve ease of doing business. Find out what bill it is, and this is tucked away on page 2 of the Citizen. In Tanzania, still there, we have also Mwananchi for you, and this is what is on the front page of Mwananchi this morning. Mbunge Kenya mbaroni kwa kuwachokonoa wa Tanzania is actually the splash on the front page of Mwananchi. In Tanzania, ni msanii Jaguar aliyetoa kauli ya kutaka wanafanya biashara wa Tanzania na Uganda wafukuzwe. Follow the story on page 3 of the Mwananchi. Dar es Salaam kutumia maji ya bahari Hindi. Also, that story continues on page 3 of the Mwananchi in Tanzania. Let's move on and to see what is happening in Uganda. We pick up the Daily Monitor in Uganda, and this is what is on the front page of the Daily Monitor in Uganda. Okay. I think a bit of corruption there from the Daily Monitor. Okay, it's taking me back to, well, I'll leave it and just go maybe to Rwanda. And having challenges lately with the Daily Monitor. But this is what is on the front page of the New Times. National unity is the highest political virtue. This is what Kagame is saying in Rwanda. President Paul Kagame and First Lady Jeanette Kagame yesterday joined thousands of Malagasis to celebrate the 59th anniversary of independence of the island nation on the invitation of Andry Rajoelina, President of Republic of Madagascar. This story continues on page 3 of the New Times. In Rwanda, also Rwanda rotates police peacekeepers in South Sudan is another story you need to follow. And you can see a standalone picture here. Geraldine Umetesi, the Deputy Director General of Imbuto Foundation, sharing lessons from a pilot project for first-time young mothers. The project contains a raft of interventions to end teenage pregnancies. This is happening in Rwanda. Let me show you, or hark it back now to 1963 and see how the Daily Nation looked then. But before I go there, I can also show you what the Wall Street Journal is holding for us this morning. Drug makers strike $63 billion deal. That is, AbbVie agrees to buy Allergan, maker of Botox, in one of 2019's largest mergers. All right, this is on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Also, US starts probe into pricing of chicken is another story you want to follow. And there is a new space race. Also, border official resigns as House passes relief bill. US-Iran trade barbs as tensions escalate is another story tucked away inside also the Wall Street Journal this morning. We continue now. Let me hark you back to 1963 and show you how the Daily Nation looked then in 1963. The young ones, that's how the Daily Nation looked in 1963. Kenya's vagrant children were in danger of being thrown back on the streets unless more money could be found for the Youth Council. We have Mrs. Dorothy Hughes, the council's chairman, warning last night. She said that with only 10,000 sterling pounds in hand for recurrent expenditure, the council could survive for only another 2 years. The long-term solution to the problem of caring for destitute children was increased government aid. Pointing out how desperate was the need to care for hundreds of children, Mrs. Hughes told the council's annual meeting that before the Youth Help or the Youth Helps Youth campaign began, 1 in every 4 crimes in Kenya was committed by a juvenile. And you can see also a related picture there. This was also a problem in 1963 with the street urchins. That story also was at the back page of the Daily Nation as well. Also, APP man lashes secessionists, that is members of the government, yesterday gave a roar of applause to an APP member who called for effective steps to stamp out the seditious activities of certain secessionist group in Kenya. The APP member was Mr. Matthew Mutiso from Machakos West. That was way back in 1963. No jobs for KANU men. Mr. Msanifu Kombo, KANU's course organizing secretary and regional assembly member, yesterday claimed that KANU supporters were being discriminated against by some employers when looking for jobs. Also, that was tucked away inside the Daily Nation as well, and it was on the front page of the Daily Nation in 1963. On page 2, Ngala is told to be patient. The recent visit to London of the Kenyan ministerial delegation was raised in the House of Representatives yesterday at question time by leader of the opposition, Ronald Ngala. Mr. Ngala asked if the Prime Minister could tell the House what the outcome of the visit was and why there had been a delay in announcing the outcome to the public. That story was also inside the Daily Nation in 1963. KBC blamed for fade out is another story. Wireless shops in Nakuru have been inundated this week with people complaining about their sets. That was all about the TV then in 1963. And maybe page 5 lastly. What was also there? Banking post for African. Just a bit of history there. And this was the Barclays Bank. The first African to be appointed to managerial level by the East African Bank takes up his duties in Nairobi this week. This is P. Nyakiamo, who has been appointed sub-manager of the Queensway branch of Barclays Bank DCO. Mr. Nyakiamo, who was 35, then returned from UK, where he attended a 4-month managerial course. He has been with Barclays since 1947. And that was 1963 when he was getting a managerial post for the staff of Barclays Bank. You can see a bit of history there from the Daily Nation way back in 1963. Lastly, I want to show you also what we do have as editorial cartoons. And this is what has been drawn today by our cartoonist. This is in the Daily Nation this morning. Jaguar. Half empty or half full. And of course, you know the story. That is what we have inside the Daily Nation as far as this part is concerned, Kenya and Tanzania, because of the xenophobic pronouncement he made yesterday. I want to show you also what we do have inside the Standard, drawn by Gado as well. And I'll just pick up the Standard for you and show you the editorial cartoon in a moment. This is what we have inside the Standard. Right, try and pick up the Standard for you. And this is what we have inside the Standard as well this morning. Where is the Standard? Yeah, there you go. See, it's Your fault. This is what has been drawn by Gado, and it's all about also Jaguar. Well, I know you're taking breakfast this morning, so I cannot just describe what is happening on this particular editorial cartoon, but you can see that is the executive and also the NASA leader there covering their noses because of the stench that is coming out. And of course, the caliber of the legislators, young legislators for that matter, has been questioned by some of parliamentarians as well. I leave it for you to decipher this. And lastly, we can also take a look at what Stano has drawn for us. This is, ooh, my touch has just gone blank on me. Let me try and see. Let me just go back there quickly before it reacts on me. This is what Stano has drawn for us inside the People Daily this morning. There we go. I will swallow all foreigners. This is still about Jaguar as well. Those are your editorial cartoons, and there is this particular picture also from our archives as well. This is the KICC, which is being threatened to be auctioned right now because of the debt that is saddled with. And we can see Mzee Jomo Kenyatta right now unveiling the plaque there in 1973. 1973, when he was actually commissioning the Kenyatta International Conference Center, which is Kenyatta International Convention Center right now, way back in September 1973. Right now, the threats to auction KICC because of 400 million shillings debt. That is what we have there. Also from our archives, courtesy of a print library, Maria Kanini, of course, giving us this particular picture. So, bit of history for you, but also you can grab a copy of the Daily Nation this morning for this headlining story that we have for you this morning. Where's the Daily Nation? Okay, I'll leave 1963 there because my touch today is a bit tricky. Now, let's move on to that particular story that we're telling you, and we have the highlights for you. Lamu Coal Power Plant, a blow to this particular plan. We'll give you the details this morning. And private and confidential, how also the government is a bit cagey on the Talo oil agreement. Now the government plans to develop a multi-billion shilling coal-fired plant in Lamu is now in limbo after the National Environment Tribunal stopped the construction of the project and ordered a fresh environmental impact assessment. NTV's Victor Kiprop highlights the project's seemingly bleak future and the government's effort to save the multi-billion project.
In the much-awaited landmark ruling, the tribunal said NEMA violated the law by issuing an environmental compliance license for the project without conducting consultative public participation forums, rendering the certificate void.
The first respondent therefore failed in discharging its mandate as provided for under the enabling statute, MCA, by appearing to have only formally endorsed the EA study process and the EA study report.
The tribunal also found the contractor Amu Power guilty of submitting an incomplete environmental impact assessment report, which ignored the provisions of the Climate Change Act and failing to provide an engineering plan for the project on the site that is said to be prone to flooding.
The second respondent, should it still wish to pursue the construction and operation of the project, to undertake a fresh EIA study following the terms of reference already formulated in January 2016. And in compliance with the Director General's Directive of 26 October 2015.
Kenya, whose 2/3 of current installed electricity capacities generated by renewable energy sources, has been pushing for the implementation of the project, arguing that it is necessary to power the country into an industrial economy.
wacha warudi watusikilize, watuite kwanza, watusikilize yale maoni yetu, na nina hakika kama watarudi na tutaongea, wakirudi hiyo license hawatapewa tena.
The power station has however been stuck at the planning stages for about 6 years due to fierce resistance from activists and local communities who believe the project will harm the environment, including the 700-year-old Lamu town, which is a UNESCO heritage site.
With today's ruling, the respondents in the case can choose to comply and conduct a fresh environmental impact assessment study or appeal the case within the next 30 days. But in the meantime, for the residents of Lamu, this is a temporary reprieve. Victor Kiprop, NTV Business, Naru.
So what does this portend for this particular project that now, yes, we have the tribunal intervening? Environmental impact assessment was not robustly done. Of course, also they were flying in the face of the Climate Change Act as well. We want to throw this to a panelist this morning. Remember, you're watching In the Market, where we try and see what is happening in the market. And of course, this is one big project that was bound to add to the power national grid in the country. It's looking at alternative energy, but also it has been embroiled in debates because of the impact, especially in the environment, of coal. And where will this head? Other countries are actually shoving this particular source of energy, but also here in the country, we're still embracing it. So what does it portend? Or are there bugbears and fears that Kenyans are expressing? Are they really unfounded? We want to hear from our panelists this morning. Allow me to introduce to you Dr. Debarl Inea, who is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi School of Business. Also, we do have with us Dr. Collins Odote, who is also a business columnist with the Business Daily and also a lecturer at the University of Nairobi, environmental lawyer as well. And we have also Stanley Munduku, who is an expert on oil and gas, advocate of the High Court. We continue with the discussion. Hit us on Twitter. AM Live NTV is our Twitter handle. AM Live NTV, your profile name on Facebook. And 20686, our SMS portal. We're eagerly waiting also for Shiv Arol to join us this morning, and we continue with the program. But let's just begin with you, Stanley, on this, because I know this is really right up your alley as far as energy is concerned, and you've been following this particular developing story for the long time, or for a longer time right now, for the longest time, and we've seen protests, especially for Mombasa. Haki, the Haki Trust as well has been trying to push the envelope to sort of decolonize, what they call it, or the campaign logo or campaign slogan is decolonize Lamu. This project, do you see it adding to the national grid? Will it be exceedingly beneficial in terms of course, the energy grid, but the flip side of it, it will be adversely affecting the environment? What is your take?
Yeah, thank you very much, Debarl, and good morning, viewers. The first thing that I want to say is that what the tribunal ruled is an aspect to do with the processes of getting the license. What was very clear is that public participation was not conclusively or properly done. And then the report that was submitted was incomplete. And these are some of the compliances that the investor or the person who is putting up the plant ought to have complied with. But on a wider scale, I want to say that sometimes in March, the president assented to the Energy Act 2019. For the first time, the issue of exploitation of coal got statutory grounding. And that is a piece of legislation for the investors and the other people who are interested in undertaking coal-related investment should actually look into and have a look at it. Now, matters of coal are controversial. Opinion is divided. On the one side, we have those people who are saying that it is a cheap source of energy and is going to actually give us the base load for purposes of running industry. It is cheap, and most of the developing countries have actually propelled through the exploitation of coal and the generation of power using coal. However, on the flip side of it, we also have environmentalists. Obviously, coal being a fossil fuel, it has its own challenges as far as pollution is concerned and general climate change concerns. This has been a debate all over. The developers of the coal technology, they have come with what they call the clean coal technology, and which they say that we can be able to reap the benefits of exploitation of coal for purposes of electricity generation, but at the same time conserve or minimize or mitigate the environmental impacts in respect to that particular development. So it's going to be interesting on how it goes. Obviously, the parties in court, there is a provision for appeal. We'll want to see whether they'll want to comply with the tribunal orders, or if, according to them, they feel that those particular orders were unfair, then they have a right to go to the High Court and to challenge the tribunal decision. Yeah.
All right. Let's hear from Dr. Collins Odote.
Debarl, I'm fairly clear that the tribunal was right in its decision.
The tribunal was right?
Completely. As a world, we have been all advocating for a transition to a low-carbon economy. And that's actually the underpinning of the climate change discussions. If you look at the run-up to and the content of the Paris Accord, countries are actually being encouraged to move away from fossil fuels as a form of fuel. That's why you hear conversations about clean energy. This country has been promoting those sources of energy. That's why there's been a huge project in Turkana, the Turkana windmill project, essentially, and that's why KenGen and his work on geothermal energy essentially is to look at what are the alternatives to fossil fuels that are extremely environment friendly. Across the world, countries that relied on coal are actually moving away from coal.
Yes.
So to see at the tail end of the 21st century that Kenya is going to a form of fuel that was more prevalent many years ago, which is fossil fuel, for me was disturbing. Disturbing for a country that was just enacting the Climate Change Act, for a country that has been promoting environmental management, for a country that hosts UN environment for many years. Because there is incontrovertible evidence that coal has negative impacts on the air, leads to air pollution. Coal has negative impact on water, leads to water pollution. Coal has negative impacts on human health. So while the tribunal faulted the process on issues of public participation, on issues of environmental impact assessment, I think the larger issues is the negative impacts of coal mining. And yes. I hope that, and just a month ago, Debarl, there was a report of an international study that was carried out that was actually showing the negative economic impacts that was going to arise from coal mining, and carried out by international experts. And there was even a statement that hopefully the president will read it and will take action. Thankfully, the tribunal has acted. So I hope that this will help us to be on track on our energy priorities and to be on track on our environmental management agenda.
All right. And of course, looking at this, we have countries like Germany and countries like coal. Like Germany, it says it wants actually to outrule or actually do away with nuclear energy in 2022. And of course, also they're looking forward to scrapping out coal as well. Why are we going full steam ahead as a country to enact these particular sources of energy like the nuclear? We have the nuclear energy. Is it a bill or an act still? It's an act right now. Yeah, it is an act. And we have also a coal being debated, and we can see where it is taking us. Countries are coming away from coal. China has come away from coal, yet maybe there are some of the people who will try and install this particular facility here in the country. Dr. Gituro.
Thanks. I think there's something perhaps first I am probably to bring out here, that you can either have a government institution called NEMA going through a process, and then you have a tribunal which stops and say due diligence was not done. I find that a bit, and I think there's something in government we should be very clear about. You have like two parallel institutions of government, and one goes against what's supposed to be done, because at the end of the day, the Amu Power Company has put a lot of investment in this. And I think when you look for an investor, this is where you really question the institutions you have. But I think here we are debating on two things, and I like what Wakili has said. We are looking from perspective of public participation and also the environmental pollution. The second one about the pollution, I have no doubt about it when you even look at Go 13. of the Sustainable Development Goals. Very important in terms of looking at the climate. Now, if I go back to that, I think, and Wakili, you are spot on. Today, we have what we call clean coal. And that's being done. Those people are taking the coal, it's actually clean. The technology is there to do it. And therefore, that is something I would probably not worry about. However, we have to trade off. Am I talking about solar? Am I going to geothermal? And then look at this country, we have more potential for solar and more potential for the geothermal. Now, the thing I also don't understand about the power today, and if you get the statistics from the Kenyan and these people, we are supplying more than our demand. And that's something I've never understood, because my bill never reflects that.
We're supplying more than the demand.
There is more actually today as we talk. But I think there is a certain, it's so important in terms of coal, because there's a certain kind of power you require. Now, in terms of public participation, I think that's very important in the Constitution. If this process was not followed in public participation, I think the tribunal went the right direction. But in terms of emission, I'm not quite sure that I would have gone for that. But public participation, because it affects the people there. And it can affect people in positive way and negative way. And I think these people in Lamu do realize the opportunities created by this, but also realize their say into it. But the bottom line, and I think this is something the government is doing, and I think I want to bring it very strong in here. The government is encouraging working as a team. So we, tribunal and NEMA, have an opportunity. I know tribunal is independent from it, but both of them are creation of government. The opportunity to sit down and probably not throw to us as it's being done out to the public. But they should have started down, looked at it. Probably we should have done here. We say, yes, the results are still delayed. We are going to do ABCD. But I think as we look at the government approach as one, I think these are the things we look at government institutions, how we give a common view to an issue.
Right. I can see your...
I just want to make one or two comments in response to YNN. The first one relates to NET. I actually think if NET ever sat with NEMA, it should be scrapped, because the entire edifice of the Environmental Management Coordination Act contemplates an institution that is quasi-judicial, an institution that is independent of NEMA. And secondly,
yes.
Let me just make the point. Secondly, its primary duty is actually to look at administrative decisions of NEMA. And when they feel that those administrative decisions are not done the right way, their duty is to cancel it. So if you look at the history and mandate of NET, it actually does not deal with disputes between Manduku and Odote. It deals with administrative decisions of the environmental agents. That's the only reason why it exists. And that's why it's been kept even after the 2010 Constitution, when we have an environment and land court. So I think for me, what NET did is principally within its legal mandate. I don't think that NET and NEMA should be negotiating and having a conversation at the start, because then it will be entering into the arena of implementation as opposed to the arena of judicial oversight. That's number one. Number two is the conversations about the amount of money that AMU put in. And I think if we understand the rationale of sustainable development, then economics must balance with the environment. So when economics seeks to triumph environment, then the amount of money that you put in does not become a greater consideration to the environmental impacts that will be arising out of it. And I think for me, that's at the heart of the conversations around coal mining.
All right. But I want to be clear. I think what I'm saying, and I think I fully appreciate and fully recognize the responsibility of the tribunal. It must be there. The point I'm making here is there is also an opportunity to have that internal dialogue without compromising your oversight responsibility. That's the point I'm making.
And I disagree with Nain.
He still disagrees.
He still disagrees. Which is fair. That's fine. I think at the bottom line, these two are creation of government anyway, aren't they? So what are you really saying?
Even the judiciary is a creation of government.
Yes.
If we went that way, then we should never have any matters going to court.
Okay. As Gituro is casing out his reply, let's hear from Stanley. Especially, I'm not really privy with the Climate Change Act, and I don't know where the violation is on this. But listening to what also we're hearing from Collins Odote here, I think we have a problem when it comes to, of course, emission that is coming from coal. But people say we have advanced technology right now that can actually countermand what these people are saying as far as the climate change is concerned, and the fusion coming, that pollution coming from actually the coal itself. Maybe you can educate me a bit this morning?
Okay, I think, first of all, two things is when you're looking at this debate, we must be able to have a very careful balance, as Collins has said, between economics and environment. That one is something that, that have to, I mean, whoever it is implementing whatever decision or whatever project, that is something that has to be keenly looked into to make sure that that particular balance is maintained. And then secondly, everything that we do in one way or another has an impact on the environment. Everything that we do. The only issue that arises is what mitigation measures have you made to ensure that the environment is not adversely affected. Now, when you look at power generation, for instance, we have got 3, 4, 5 ways of getting the power generation. First of all, which is the most common in Kenya, we have got the hydro. Yeah, and hydro nowadays, it has all its challenges. Yeah, there are people also who are having environmental issues against the hydros, the hydro dams and all that. Secondly, we have got the wind. We have got solar. We have got diesel, thermal, what we call thermal, the MSD. And then now we have geothermal. Geothermal has been very favorite because actually its effects are quite minimal. But obviously there are 1 or 2 environmental issues that arise because of exploiting geothermal. Now we have coal and then we have the nuclear, what you've discussed.
Yes.
But you realize that the moment you implement, or the moment an investor comes to implement this particular project, be it Kengen, be it a private investor or wherever it is, there's an environmental impact assessment procedure that you have to go to. It has got certain steps that you must follow. Yeah? And it is assumed that if all those steps are followed and then you get the license at the end of the day, you can be able to implement your project. And the moment you implement your project, now what really determines is the audit as to whether you are actually sticking to what you are supposed to do. As to whether the climate change issues are there with respect to coal, they are there. Just like the way they are there in respect to petroleum, in respect to other forms of energy. And the issue is that what it is that this investor or the government has put in place so as to mitigate the effects. You've just correctly stated that some developing countries are moving out of coal,
yes,
and nuclear. But one thing that you have to do, if you look at their history of their development, you realize that actually coal was one of the major propellants or propellers for their development, especially when it comes to the issue of energy. A case has been made why we should move to wind and solar, but you realize that when you're talking about the base load, yeah, you realize that wind and solar may not be effective in giving the base load, especially for driving industry.
Absolutely, that's the point.
Because like wind, you will get the wind energy when the wind is blowing. When the wind is not blowing, you'll have a challenge. The solar energy will be there during when there is sunshine. If there is no strong sunshine, then you realize that you will have a challenge, save for the little that the batteries may have saved. And it also depends on what it can be able to do. Now, the moment you are talking about serious energy for purposes of driving industry, especially now that you want to be an industrialized country, then you realize that you may not write off the contribution that coal, the contribution that nuclear, the contribution that hydro will have to make in this particular economy. The other issue that Daktari has raised is the issue of demand. About 2-3 years ago, the government had an ambitious project, which they were calling the 5,000 plus project, whereby the whole idea was to make sure that at least we pump into the national grid 5,000 megawatts of power, and for purposes of propelling industrialization and all that. I am not sure that this has been achieved. But you realize that
it's about
in the mix,
it's 2000 something.
Yeah, in the energy mix that came up, you realize that they had factored in coal as one of the sources of energy that will generate the power that is supposed to get into the power grid. But unfortunately, because of what has been going on, that has not been achieved. So really, as I've said, it's really something that we need to have a very careful balance. And as to the dispute between NEMA and the tribunal and all that, I think it is important for each of these bodies to maintain operational independence. The reason being is that you have the operator here or the investor who wants to come up with a project. NEMA, being the lead agency in environmental matters, will make certain decisions. And the tribunal is actually a specialized quasi-judicial body that will deal with environmental issues arising from those decisions, as Collins has put it. Yeah? So it is important to maintain that operational independence, so that at least the decisions that are being made, they are properly and independently adjudicated upon.
But have we interrogated maybe why countries, you said of course for the longest time Germany or the developing countries are actually, what really drove their development is coal. Have we interrogated why they actually, now uncoupling themselves from coal itself?
I think they want the point. I'm sorry.
Because we need to get the reasons. What is the rhyme and reasons what they're actually pulling out from these energy sources, nuclear and coal?
You see, Kenya is a young country in terms of compared to other countries. And very recently we discovered coal in the Mui Basin in Kitui. But coal having been there for a while, studies have been undertaken. And pursuant to these studies, certain very strong environmental lobbies have come. These environmental lobbies have managed to influence policy decision in the developed countries. And in view of the fact that now they have other sources of energy, they are preferring utilizing or exploiting the other sources of energy as opposed to coal. And I think that is the issue. And then obviously we also have this geopolitical talk that people say that they don't want other countries to develop. Others, they have got this, they have got very strong...
But don't we have politicians' interest in this? Because we know there are politicians actually who are pushing the envelope for this particular coal to be installed in this country, the coal plants. Don't we have political interest?
In Kenya, there is no way you can have a major project without political influence. And that is unfortunately how we are governed.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think he's raising a very good point here. I think I like the way Stanley is calling serious energy. You really need that base road, serious energy. And you look some of this, like the cement manufacturing, there's something actually they have to import because you don't have that base load. And that's what the coal is looking at. And look, it's also from the perspective. Here I am, I have coal. And coal, in my view as a country, is an asset. Because of these issues, and I think the robbing group is so strong, do I leave it out there and not exploit it? I think that's the best thing. I have an asset here called coal. You can bring me this base road. Because of environmental issues, which can be mitigated with the technology you have. And I think the other point, if you look at those countries which have moved from coal, they went to nuclear, which also gives you a very strong base load. However, and I think there's a question I'm against nuclear, they are very cautious how to deal with it. Because it's a disaster. We know what happened in Japan. So if we go that route as a country, the nuclear, I'm not quite sure whether they have made, what we'll do. But coal, in my view, with the technology, we have provided a better avenue and a quick one to get this kind of serious energy we want. Now, if you look at the point he raised earlier on, I think we used so much rely on hydro. If you look at the current figures in terms of how much we have produced, it's actually the least. Geothermal is taking in. So it's wind, so it's solar. If the current figures in terms of what you need to bring the 5,000 megawatts, of course the government have revised that because we're not few reasons. Of course, hydro has this problem because drought and all that. So what probably you can actually, if you look at the mix now, it's a very interesting one because you're moving from hydro and we are going now to geothermal. Now, the case I probably would bring forward in terms of the coal is that opportunities give us as a country for those kind of serious energy as Stanley is putting in.
Thank you.
But I think we need also to be very clear, and I think I appreciate Dictari's point. It's really, and we do this, it's the same thing with the animal and the us as an environment. You have to balance that, the social returns and the economic returns.
Economic returns.
Yeah.
Yeah, the PPP we always talk about in this, the people, the planet, and the profit. Let's hear from Collins Odota before we take a
Debarl, 3 weeks ago, I was in a conversation helping some embassy to develop its support program for Kenya over the next 5 years. And a colleague made the same sentiments that, you know, a lot of the developed countries relied on dirty fuel to be able to develop. It is not possible for us to develop as African countries without relying on it. I disagreed then and I still disagree now, because this debate is over 45 years old. In 1972, when for the first time we recognized the effects of our development activities on the environment, that's in Stockholm, Sweden, there was a whole conversation between developing countries on the one hand and developed countries on the other. Developed countries were complaining about the negative impacts of developed countries, of development through pollution. Developing countries were saying our only problem is poverty. We cannot in 2019 take the same approach where our greatest focus is on poverty alleviation, saying for us to industrialize, we will industrialize at every cost and everything else is a necessary consequence. The debate about coal takes us to that issue. And I think when you carry out an environmental impact assessment, it is not automatic that the only solution is mitigation measures. You make a decision, you do an evaluation to determine are the negative impacts of this activity capable to mitigate it or not. When they are of such a scale that mitigation is not an option, then the solution is to stop that project. And the coal project is not the first that has been stopped. There are many other projects that through the EIA process, you first determine, can I go on with it or not? If you can't go on with it, then you must stop. And I think what the tribunal is saying, which is at the heart of it, is at the stage of carrying out an EIA, we were not rigorous enough, we were not in-depth enough for us to be able to make an honest decision, should this project be able to go on or not, number one. Number two, if it goes on, are there sufficient remedial measures? And I think that's where we've been taken back to. And I think when we go on, we must not prejudge that it must go. You see, government already determined we will exploit coal anyway without going through that process. And I think that's where we need to go. The last thing is, if you look at, and I think Gituro has mentioned it, if you look at our energy demands, just I think 2 weeks ago, the CS for energy revised those demands downwards. So it means we have less energy demands than we thought we had a few years ago. The energy sources that Manduku has mentioned, we haven't fully exploited. We've not fully exploited other cleaner options. Why are we looking for the easier option, which is the more dangerous to the environment, before exploiting the ones that are actually less dangerous to the environment? I think that's the conversation that the Ministry of Energy and NEMA must lead this country in a much more robust and honest discussion.
Thank you. And of course, when we circle back, we'll get clarity from Stanley Manduku as well to tell us why these countries like Germany and China, they're breaking away from coal and nuclear sources of energy as well, so that actually can get an understanding why we should embrace it here as a country, or we should do away with it. We continue with the conversation on the other side of a break. A lot happening in the market, and of course we shall be looking at taming the wage bill, where we have end of permanent and pensionable state jobs as well. What does that really portend also for the austerity measures in the country as well? That's on the other side of a break. Don't go away.
mostly the sulfur dioxide gases, carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and all this. And the problem of that is that you realize that even the rain that falls thereafter is actually polluted rain, and we have what you call acidic rain. So those are the scientific arguments against the utilization or the exploitation of coal as an energy source. Now, why are we getting there? One of the things is that we have to be very clear, is that we are getting there because we have got the national energy and petroleum policy that outlines that we have to exploit coal for purposes of us meeting our electricity or energy demands. So one, there's a policy decision by government. This particular policy was developed. I'm grateful having been part of the team that developed that particular policy. And we got a lot of expert opinion into it.
Yes.
It was actually multi-sectoral. We had a representation. In fact, even one of the NEMA lawyers actually sat in the team to guide us through when this particular policy was being developed. The policy actually got cabinet approval. And so why we are implementing it is because it's government policy that we implement it. And then the other advantages is that when you put it in a pedestal, in the issue when you balance it out, there's an entire section in the ministry that actually deals with coal. And actually it has made these studies, and they have come up with a verdict that it is possible to exploit coal sustainably, and the effects of coal, the negative effects of coal can be effectively be mitigated. And that is the decision why the government decided to go along with that.
Yep. Collins?
I like Manduku's sentiment that it is the policy of government, so we must implement the policy of government, even if that policy is wrong, as it is in this instance. Two, one of the people who advised them in developing this is the same NEMA that is being indicted in the process of coal. And I think we were just discussing offline. I think the sooner NEMA wakes up to the reality, the better it is for us. And just yesterday, I was reading a report about plastics. You know, 2 years ago, NEMA banned the use of single-use plastics. A very noble idea. But if you go across this country, Debarl, everywhere, you go to I was in the village last weekend, and I remember my wife asking a guy who is wrapping things, "You mean you still have plastic paper?" And they said, yeah, we have. What is the problem? So we have an environmental agency that does not realize its responsibility over the environment, and that makes decisions out of convenience, and that is dangerous for us. I think there is the first statement by Manduku was fundamental. The first statement, which he didn't contradict, is that, you know, coal is not environmentally friendly. Having made that concession that coal is not environmental friendly, and having recognized that internationally, actually countries with more advanced technology than ourselves are moving away from coal, I think it requires much more convincing to say what is it that we as a developing country that actually sometimes relies on second-hand technology from developed countries. What they have, equipment that they have used is the ones that sometimes donate to us. What is it that we are going to do that China is not doing? What is it that we are going to do that Germany is unable, unwilling, or incapable of doing, that will ensure we address this negative?
Is what Stanley is not telling us this morning.
Neither Stanley nor government. I don't want to blame Stanley. Government is not telling us. And until they tell us, we can't just say we must go on to it. I want to hear that, you know, Germany is living because of XYZ. As Kenya, we will do ABC to address the concerns of the other developed countries. Because internationally there is the recognition that coal is the dirty fuel. That's not in debate. So what are we going to do to address this? That I haven't heard that. I just hear that we need to meet our energy needs. I just hear that our policy recognizes it, and those two don't convince me.
All right. And of course, maybe another question that we can throw into this as well as we're discussing coal is the fact that we've been opened our arms and embraced also some of these automobile plants in this country. Like recently we have the VWs as well, the Volkswagen that opened, the assembly plant here in the country. But the question is, we know what VW has been enrolled in, especially in the US, where we have the nitrate oxide, where they had defeat devices installed into some of their cars. So when they're going for this environmental testing, they could pass. But when they go outside to, to the environment, it is diametrically different. They've been polluting. Did we do enough also assessment on that, or also to try and probe why are we having these plants put up in this country? Will all these cars that have been rejected in the US and maybe in the Europe be actually brought here in the country as a dumping ground in the guise of having a VW plant and also opening up space for employment for Kenyans? And yet we have the flip side of it, that our environment is being also polluted. That is a question that we need to ask ourselves, because I saw that and I asked myself, have they really followed through? Because they have cases, and this will not be a dumping ground for those defeat devices.
I think, Debarl, that's not I wouldn't call it dumping ground. I think we need perhaps to go deeper into it. But before I come to that, I think there's something perhaps need, and I think Stanley was right. And my experience in government, if a policy comes on the table, and that policy goes through cabinet and is adopted, it has gone through a tremendous process. It's not a question you wake up and there's a policy. And I'm happy that he was in that group which was going through that. It's a debate. I think what we need to do perhaps here to get more knowledgeable about this is, and I think that policy is in the public domain, is to understand what this policy is going about. And that policy, in my view, must have also said what are the mitigation factors when you go into this. And I would have no doubt in my mind, when you have the people of caliber of Stanley, that is probably coming out there. Now, coming to the VW plant, we know what happened in the US. Somebody who was messing up with that, and the VW took the responsibility on that. If you know the kind of vehicle we are talking about here in the plant in Thika, of that, the technology has changed. This was more of the hard requirement of automobiles in the US. And I think the same thing VW learned. Whatever we put a plant, we have to go there. The other parts I should not worry about, give it the next 5 years. Most of the vehicles are actually moving from what kind of combustions we have, like Volvo. Next year, they are going electric. So when you're doing an investment like that, like VW, and they have gone into VW, about 3 automobiles, you probably are not investing in this country with that. And this was not really the technology. This was actually a mischievous way of trying to beat the requirement in the US, if you look at it from that perspective. So I'm very comfortable that the plant we have here, I think it doesn't have that kind of thing. And even when they look forward, we're actually moving away from those high emission kind of vehicles to where is that. And the other thing perhaps you have to take, and perhaps this is why we need to balance the economics and the social return, I would say, Kagame has already started this. They have one in Rwanda in terms of the VW. And the question you have to ask ourselves at the end of the day, and probably I might sound more perhaps naive in this, but what opportunities are we providing to the Kenyans at the end of the day? But now the government comes and says, yes, it's important that because you're providing opportunities for our people in terms of employment, but are we meeting the standards? And I think I want to go back to what my colleague raised here. I think it's time NEMA perhaps ups its game. Because if you ask most Kenyans, they say, no, that was just a desk research. And that will give you the report is cool. I think that's where we need to go down. That's where we need to become very strong in terms of ensuring this important investment we are doing as a country. How do we also at the same time ensure that they meet the social returns?
All right. Let's say from Stanley, the VW plans.
One thing I have to say.
Yes.
One thing I have to say is that with respect to the policy actually took about 4 years to develop. It actually replaced the sessional paper number 4 of 2004, which had become obsolete. And this is one policy, even the ensuing legislation that came up, whereby public participation was thoroughly done, and actually those arguments, pro and against arguments, were done. And also, most importantly, is that we must be able to look at what we call local conditions. I think the first thing I want to say is that you realize that the US, they have their own standards and safeguards. Germany have their own standards and safeguards. We also in Kenya have our own standards and safeguards. Unfortunately or fortunately, we have institutions that are supposed to be implementing these particular safeguards. We have got a constitution that actually confers a right to a clean environment. So you realize that these institutions that we have developed, first of all, we must have confidence in them. And then secondly, we have got a very elaborate process and procedure of questioning government policy, or even nullifying it through the court processes and all that. We have got those particular procedures. And what normally happens is that concrete facts must be presented for and against. Mm-hmm. This is a debate if we were to have. We have the proponents of coal here and the people against coal. Yeah? It's a debate that will take a week or two so that for it to be exhausted. But one thing I have to assure them is that there was adequate quality control in the development of that particular policy. Absolutely. There was adequate public participation and actually a lot of professional expertise. We even got support from the IMF and the World Bank. They came us and they gave us support when we were developing this particular policy. Now, why is it that what is banned in the US has come to Kenya? The first thing is that for you to come to Kenya, you must operate based on the municipal laws. Although we know that the Constitution says that treaties that have been signed abroad are actually part of the Kenyan laws. But you realize that based on the current standards that we have, you realize that such projects can effectively be implemented in Kenya. Now the question will be is that are the standards okay? Are they proper or are they not proper? If they are proper, it's okay. If they are not proper, there's a process and procedure for amending and questioning them. Mm-hmm. So what I want to say is that I believe that the VW, as they bring their project here, they'll be subjected to the rigorous environmental impact assessment processes. And in the event that those processes are not properly done, people will still go to the National Environment Tribunal, as they did with the coal, and the decision will also have to become there. And here we have to have a careful balance between the need for us to invite investors into our country so that we can be able to develop, vis-a-vis the environmental concerns. Mm-hmm. So the environmental concerns, you have got a sieving mechanism of seeing what is it that we can be able to accommodate or hold as a country, and what is it that we cannot be able. And we should guard ourselves against the doctrine of imposition, saying that because US is doing it, Kenyans must do it. That's why we've been having issues like gay and all that, because US is allowing or is very permissive to gay, does it mean that Kenyan we should allow it? And what I'm trying to say is that each and every situation should be looked at based on its own merit and based on the facts that have arisen from the studies that we have.
Right, Collins.
At least gay issues are not interdependent like the environment. The environment is interdependent. So what happens in the US has implications of what happens in Kenya. But I think Manduku has made several important points. The first one is Article 42 on the right to a clean and healthy environment. The second is the elaborate mechanisms for questioning things. That's what the National Environment Tribunal did. And by making that decision, the National Environment Tribunal has implicitly questioned both our blind faith in coal and the procedures that was used in terms of approving the project. Mm-hmm. So I am in happy instances in that issue. The second one is about standards. And I think there's one important point, Debarl, that arises from your question on the VW plant.
Yes.
And the important question that arises is that we should not have blind faith to every development investment. That because it is going to improve our economy, we should close our eyes to everything. And this is important for us to have rigorous examination, right, so that we are able to determine what are the benefits, what are the negatives. Unfortunately, the concerns we raise about NEMA can be raised about several other agencies because of the limited resources and because of our drive towards raising more money and attracting investment. Sometimes we don't do the rigorous cost-benefit analysis, the rigorous background checks to enable us make a much more informed decision. Because if we do so, we'll be able to address the concerns and ask ourselves, if these were the concerns in the US, are those concerns legitimate or not? For example, Debarl, as a country, we import second-hand vehicles. Mm-hmm. You know, our yearly limit for Kenya is 8 years. You know, the yearly limit for our neighbors is 10 years. we've been having a debate now as a country that yes, we currently have 8 years, but if we look at the vehicles coming in, are they really beneficial to the environment in terms of an 8-year limit? Should we not reduce that limit to 3? Amongst other things, A, to deal with the negative environmental consequences, but secondly, to also promote our local industry. That's a legitimate conversation, and it's a conversation that I think we need to have and make the debate. We can't then say, because our laws have been having us having 8, then we shouldn't go away from it. Or we shouldn't say, because Tanzania has 10, let's also move towards 10. Because at the end of the day, you must look at your context, yes, and ask yourself, what does this mean for our national interest? But as you do so, always recognize that, number one, we will not compromise the right to a clean and healthy environment. But number two, that environmental management is a global challenge, and sometimes learning lessons from your neighbors, learning lessons from other people helps you to avoid reinventing the wheel or to avoid going through the same path that other people have gone in the past with negative consequences.
Right. I think that's a very strong point he's made in the last point. There are not two ways. You can't negotiate clean energy. And if we start from that point, the other discussion falls into place. That, to me, is the starting point. And we know the repercussion of non-clean energy. And therefore, if we start from that, then we can actually, all the other places can, I think. And perhaps at one time, we have to take as a country a decision, no, because of the impact it will have.
Thank you. All right, so we actually can move with the conversation also still on energy. And there is also a very interesting development as far as tallow oil is concerned. And of course, the deal with Kenya, where the initial optimism about oil discovery in the Lokichar Basin around Lake Turkana has slowly worn off over time. To make matters worse, I should say, it is being replaced by a sense of uncertainty in the wake of worrying news coming from the oil sector failing. First, it emerged that Uganda had decided to lay its own pipeline through Tanzania, clearly reducing the viability of doing one through Turkana to Lamu. Then came a curious early oil export scheme just months after tallow oil had slapped the government with a hefty cost bill. But that was only a tip of the iceberg. It now emerges that the government will not make public the agreements between it and tallow oil that happens to be listed on the London Stock Exchange. The latest point of non-disclosure is Tallow's procurement of an international loan of 300 billion shillings after the agreement with Kenya government. In all probability, this is a potential liability to the public. Despite the provisions of a constitution, Petroleum CS John Munez has said that details of the agreement will remain confidential, just like all the deals between the parties. That clearly goes against the spirit of a constitution, in particular Section 35, which gives the citizens freedom to access information impacting on the public. And I just want to throw this to our expert as well to just tell us more about this developing story. Private and confidential, this is a public, of course, entity, so to speak, and we having the right to know what actually this deal is all about. We've had also the SGR. The contractual agreement has never been known to the public yet. We're still waiting to hear, even from the government itself, even after the president gave a promissory note that, yes, we're going to reveal the contractual agreement. But tell us more on this, because now this is also really right up your alley.
Okay. Fine, I think you've raised quite a number of issues. The first issue is when we look at the oil exploitation process, it is normally done through a framework called, at that time we were calling them the production sharing contracts. And the production sharing contracts actually entails the entire process of exploitation, from exploration to actually the production and the development. And one of the things that happens is that when you do all these agreements, we have what we call a confidentiality clause. So the confidentiality clause restricts the release of information based on certain parameters and consequences. And basically, what happens is that in a typical oil exploitation, we have got the cost oil and we have got the profit oil. And the investor comes in and sinks what we call risk capital. You don't make any contribution. They do the exploration. At times, they do the exploration, they come up with dry wells, and that is their cost. But the moment they hit on reserves that are declared commercial, then they are given the processes of starting, they do what we call the field development plans, and they start the process of exploitation. At this point in time, then government is entitled to get a share. Not forgetting the fact that pursuant to the Constitution, is that all mineral and mineral oils are actually owned by the government. But here we are talking about the process and procedures of exploiting that particular resource. So government does not have risk capital to undertake exploitation. They are doing it, but at a very limited scale through National Oil Corporation. But you realize that the moment an investor has come in, put in his risk capital, and he has been able to make sure that the reserves can be commercially exploited, then they start the process of exploitation. They agree on the ratios on what will be cost oil. That means they are allowed, by virtue of these petroleum agreements, for them to recover the entire cost they have used in exploiting that particular resource before the profit share comes in. Now, prior to 2010, you realize that we have got now two sets of petroleum agreements. There are those that were signed prior to 2010, whereby the constitutional dispensation was a bit different, and there are those that have been signed. I don't know how many have been signed after the 2010 Constitution, but that particular process is clearly elaborated in the Energy Act and the Petroleum Act. Now, Article 71 of the Constitution provides for a procedure for ratification of these agreements by Parliament. So these are bases upon which, before the agreement is actually signed, there is a parliamentary process, which is a public process for people to be able to see what is contained in this particular agreement and what are the ratios and all that. So by dint of the operation of the Constitution and by dint of Article 71 of the Constitution, then parliamentary ratification actually puts these things across. Now, when you look at Article 35, that gives you the right to information. One thing that we must say is that by dint of Article 24, this right is not absolute. We also have Access to Information Act that has come. You realize that there are some certain information that is protected. One, for instance, you can't say because you have got a right to information, give me the password of how you operate A, because that is the information. You go under the Article 35, you say, give me the password. You realize that there are certain information that is classified or is protected pursuant to one, information that will be injurious to business interests, information that will be injurious to public health, public safety, public security. And it is not that that is enough. If you feel that by requesting for this information you are not being given, then you can be able to approach the court under Article 35. The person who is having the disclosing party, or the party who is supposed to disclose that particular information, has a responsibility also to go to court and say why he is not able to give you that particular information. Mm-hmm. So it really, you know, like now you say, I drink Coca-Cola. So give me the formula for Coca-Cola. Correct. Under Article 35, I'm entitled to that information. You understand? Coca-Cola will not give you that whatever. Why? This is a trade secret. It will be injurious to their commercial interest. And they have got reasons. And there's case law to show that why certain information cannot be given. Now, when you're talking about contracts that have been signed, the confidentiality clause, obviously it gives parameters under which such disclosures can be given. So it really depends on the parties seeking to get that particular information to approach, to use the correct procedure to see whether it can be given, whatever can be given. Mm-hmm. What that cannot be given, cannot be given.
So we are at a very sharp edge of a dilemma here. Colin, so to speak.
Debarl, I'm actually horrified.
You're horrified?
I think Stanley should go back to work for government. Because he argues like the government spokesman.
I don't think so. Is that?
But because of several reasons. The first one, Debarl, my reading of the Constitution does not tell me that oil and minerals are owned by government. It is not. The Constitution that we passed in 2010 is fairly explicit. I will come to that. The Constitution is fairly explicit that oil and mineral resources are public, part of public land. Public land is not owned by government. Public land is owned by the people of Kenya. What government does, government holds, and underline the word holds oil resources in trust for the people of Kenya. The actual owners are actually the people of Kenya. And why that is critical is if you look at the history of mining and the history of oil, people who have been at the Ministry of Mining have actually dealt with these resources as if it is their private property and not for the people of Kenya. And the reason why that is an important conversation, it goes to the second issue that Manduku has spoken about that I agree with. This whole conversation about confidentiality clauses. Mm-hmm. The reason why these things are kept secret is because the mandarins at the Ministry of, in charge of oil, in charge of petroleum, assume that these are their private property that they should be keeping away from Kenya. You know, no less than the two presidents we've had since the 2010 constitution. President Kibaki and President Uhuru Kenyatta have both made public commitments that these agreements will be in public. I've been involved in conversations, Debarl, about tallow oil, yes. Involving ministry, involving tallow, involving the county government of Turkana. And the people of tallow tell you in public, in meetings, we have no problem about these agreements being disclosed. None, as long as the disclosure is from the government of Kenya. Then the government of Kenya comes and says the same thing. That's why I say, Manduku should go back to government. Confidentiality clauses. Mm-hmm. There can be nothing confidential about what we have agreed we will be paid. There can be nothing confidential about the terms under which we are having this. The court, in the case of Friends of Lake Turkana, have actually made an explicit discussion concerning agreements we have international investors concerning energy, and said the right of access to information in environmental cases is fundamental and cannot be violated. Mm-hmm. So I think for government to say we can't disclose it, it's not just against Article 35, it's against international processes. Because, Debarl, internationally, there's something called the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, yes. EITI. The rationale of EITI is to ensure that there's disclosure in the extractive industry. And why that's important is because this industry is mired with corruption, it is mired with intrigues. If you look at the dispute between Uganda and tallow, and now the taxation, the tax bills that were being slapped with by tallow, it goes to lack of disclosure. Because when there's no disclosure, what then happens? Yes, the companies pre-finance several of the activities. But after financing, they will come and tell you, we have spent this amount of money, you now owe us this much. And because there was no disclosure through the process, the process of then engaging with them comes extremely difficult. Debarl, I've been involved, in fact, the reason why I started writing for the Business Daily was because of the work I was doing on the extractive industry. At the heart of conversations internationally, if you look at the challenges that countries that have discovered oil face, in fact, people ask, how is it that most of the countries that have oil are also the ones that are in conflict, are the ones that are poor? How come the oil does not benefit people? It doesn't benefit people because the manner in which we go through this process ensures that the actual beneficiaries are the international companies and the government officials who are in charge of the process. So we privatize public resources. And at the heart of ensuring that public resources are not privatized are two things. Number one is that we must recognize that the Constitution vests the ownership of those resources on the people of the Republic of Kenya and not on the government agencies who hold that information and trust. The second is that at the heart of ensuring we benefit is to ensure that the information about it, whether this information is injurious or whether it is beneficial, must be available to the people of Kenya. That's at the heart of Article 35. And I don't think that we can allow government to get away with saying we will not disclose, because they do not have an option. The option is constitutionally settled. They must disclose information concerning the extractive industry.
So we need to know, according to their access to information. I think you've clarified that very well. We'll come to Stanley. Let's hear from Dr. Kituro Wanaina.
I think it would be extremely naive for any government to disclose everything. There's a level. There should be a level of confidentiality. Look over the world. There are certain things you can't put there because one, and I think this is the important point, when you disclose it, it's probably a threat to that society you're trying to protect. So there are certain things, even you as an individual, there's certain things you might not even disclose to your wife. So there are certain areas, and I think we need to be careful that Article 35, taking it out of board.
But what are these certain things that we're talking about? If we are talking about a cost-benefit analysis, we don't the public deserve the right to know how they're going to benefit from it?
And I think if you look at the debate which was in Turkana, and Stanley is right, there was in terms of what percentages goes to the community, what percentage goes to the company, there was total debate on that. And it was very clear Now, I'm not quite sure what these other things now we're saying. We need this information to be disclosed. Because I remember Nano, as a governor for Turkana, still there, saying, no, the community, it started, the community, what, 80%. Until we came to an agreeable kind of ratio of those profits. And it was full disclosure.
But that's the disclosure about the relationship between the government. The county governor, the governor of Turkana is on record as saying, I am the governor. I actually don't know the terms of the agreement between Talo and national government. How more basic can that complaint be? I think nobody says that there are things you cannot disclose. But at least the overall terms of the contract must be disclosed. If there's anything that needs to be redacted, say so. But here, actually, government has disclosed nothing concerning the terms of the agreement between themselves and Talo. Nothing. Nobody has seen the agreement. Nobody knows the content.
But I think Debarl was coming up. We need to take the cue from the president. He said some of these things, even SGR, and I was involved in all that. There are certain, and the question which is coming from everybody, and perhaps one of the things we need to be careful not to behave like people coming from no-knowledge, is that it's more expensive than other areas. That's a key thing coming with SGR. And there are reasons why you look, if you compare, and that's correct, and David D has brought it very strongly. If you look at the SGR in Ethiopia, it was far cheaper than us. But they have a very clear policy on land acquisition. Very different from us.
But we have also the SGR. Was it, I don't know if it was the SGR, but or the port in Tanzania. If you can remember where we had a clip doing rounds the social media about John Pombe Magufuli castigating a certain contractual agreement with the Chinese government. Collins, I don't know if you came across that particular.
Yes, and that's actually,
you did.
And that's actually the reason why you find that there are a lot of contracts that were actually cancelled in Tanzania.
Yes. Because
of this thing called secrecy. Debarl, if we operate in a government that thinks that everything is official secrets, everything is serikali, we will not be a modern, open and democratic society that our constitution says. We can discuss this until the cows come to roost, but I think there is international recognition that disclosure in the extractive industry is at the heart of good governance.
Expand that word called
one thing, Debarl, I want to agree with Collins, is that you know, like the argument I've had even in the previous discussion is that in Kenya, despite the fact that there are very noble ideals or things we are supposed to do, the problem is that we have got this big problem of having a very bad culture. And this bad culture has made Kenyans have what we call suspicion. And in an environment whereby we know that we have got bad culture full of governance challenges, deals under the table, corruption and all that, obviously Kenyans are actually right in trying to understand or in trying to seek what it is that has to be done. And the argument I'm putting here is not that I am against disclosure. Disclosures must be done, but must be done through a certain framework where parameters are very, very clear. Now, you realize that on the issue of revenue share, I know that was one of the biggest problems that we had. And when the issue arose, I think government addressed it, and actually it is there in the Petroleum Act and the Energy Bill on the sharing ratio between the local community, the county governments, and the national government. The ratios, it went to parliament, was debated. Actually, that made that particular bill come back about twice before it could become the law. Now, we also have other aspects of Article 166 that says that local communities must benefit from the developing the land and all that. So there's a lot of procedural or legislative or constitutional provisions that provides for this type of arrangement. Now, it is not very clear on what basis the CES was saying that is not going to disclose, but you realize when you look at the PSC as it is not just about revenue. There is a lot of things, you know, it's a technical document. There are a lot of things, there are processes, there are procedures, especially the entire field development plan arrangement, there are all those things. Yeah? So you may realize that based on the confidentiality principle and based on what is contained in that particular agreement, there are some aspects of that particular agreement that may not be bluntly declared in public. The beauty of it is that it is very clear even in the statute that out of the revenues that will come, the government will get, I think it's 70%, the local community will get, I think it's 10%, and the county will get about 30%. That one is there if you're talking about the issues of revenue. But again, when you're looking at these agreements when you come, you see these are agreements that are of an international nature. And then even you realize that some of them even have ousted the jurisdiction of the Kenyan courts for purpose of being the first dispute resolution mechanisms of choice, and they have given international arbitration a priority in this particular respect. So there are all those advantages, and there are all these things that people have to really look into. But what is clear is that I am not against blanket non-disclosure.
Correct. That's excellent, because if you talked about even the revenue and nothing else, Manduku says extremely well what the law says, 70, 20, 10. But you see, for us to share that, Debarl, we must know 100%.
Yes.
What is the 100%? What's the amount of revenue? We will not know the amount of revenue from the act. We will know the amount of revenue from the production sharing contract, because it will say this is the amount of revenue that government is entitled to from the process. You can only get that from the contract. Number two, if you then go to the production sharing contract, I think we cannot have a situation where a regulation under an act outs the constitution. The requirement for disclosure under Article 35 is a constitutional requirement. Number two, Kenya is not the only country where exploration takes place. I've just told you, Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, EITI, is an international global principle that requires disclosure in the extractive industry. Why can our own cabinet secretary be saying, when his predecessor, the Ministry of Mining, spent a lot of time under the auspices of the African Mining Vision to be able to show how Kenya wants to promote the process of transparency and wants to promote the process of openness. I think we can disagree about the rest, but it's unfortunate for our own cabinet secretary to say in public, I will not disclose.
I think Debarl here has a point here. I think the CS should perhaps come different. But I think Stanley is raising, it's a way we approach things in this country. They're very difficult. I'm just looking at what on the Nation at the back, and the Auditor General was speaking of a launch of, the report is called Report on Kenya's Inability to Fight Corruption. When you look at, it would have made a lot of difference if I said Report on Kenya's ability to fight corruption. But this is how we approach it, inability. And I think that's what we are saying here. And I think, and I agree with you, maybe the minister, the CS, should have been very clear what cannot be disclosed. But I think the fight here at the bottom line is the revenue sharing, which is very clear. And I think the point which Stanley raised earlier on, Coca-Cola will never give you the formula of what they do. And we must appreciate as a business way of doing things. But I think, and also the president has come up very strongly and say, some of this will disclose. And I think it's a responsibility of Macharia in SGR saga, is Kittel in energy, and say, these are the information we are going to disclose. I think we should take responsibility in dealing with that.
Okay. All right. We need just to move on also to our next story, where is all about stemming the wage bill. And I think we'll allude to what also Dr. Debarl Inea is actually talking about. And this is in light of the Auditor General's report on corruption. We'll just give you gritty details on this. Is at the back page of a Daily Nation. But also the Public Service Commission has stopped employing entry-level state workers on permanent and pensionable terms in a radical policy shift aimed at stemming the runaway government wage bill. Fresh university graduates, diploma holders, and other professionals getting jobs in ministries will now be deployed on renewable 3-year contracts based on satisfactory performance, according to the Public Service Commission Chairman, Stephen Kirogo. Only senior civil servants of the rank of director and above are currently hired on contractual terms. The PSC Chairman said the new policy is aimed at slowing down growth of public wage bill while enhancing productivity. The policy, effective from the year starting July, will, however, not affect teachers, the police and military who are not classified as civil servants. It will also cut down on costs associated with retirement benefits, such as pension and retrenchment, as the fresh employees will only be given a service gratuity when they leave the end of their contracts. We want also to just discuss this with our panelists before we wind up. And you need also to pick up the copy of a Daily Nation today, not the Daily Nation, but the Business Daily. When we're talking about all this, we can also couple that with NSC companies spending 2.7 billion shillings on staff layoffs. It's all in an effort to just try and tame that wage bill, according to the PSC, but also all the private sector on the listed companies. Also, many of them are spending a lot of money on layoffs. But the most interesting thing that maybe we should also show you is the fact that while these companies are they're spending this tidy sum of money on layoffs, just look at what we had on the front page of a Business Daily earlier, right? 6 top bank CEOs and 1 billion shillings in 1 year. 6 top bank CEOs and 1 billion shillings in 1 year. So there is a sort of a paradox that we do not really understand. When they're laying off, and on the other side also we have them taking away huge bonuses and the salary discrepancies, what is really happening. In light of the Capital Markets Authority's corporate governance codes, there is that particular, of course, provision that the CEOs, actually they should declare their salaries. And if the company is not performing very well, also there should be a salary slash. But let's just hear from our panelists this morning. Collins, on this particular development, let's just begin with you from the Public Service Commission. What is it showing?
Debarl, I think the issue of the ballooning wage bill is a legitimate concern and something that needs to be dealt with. There's been past efforts to deal with it. There was even a time that there was the retrenchment exercise to try and rationalize civil service and to try and deal with it. But I'm not sure whether the effort towards 3-year renewable contracts will address the big issue that they claim, which is productivity. Because, Debarl, we've had performance contracting for a very long time in the civil service. And performance contracting was to ensure that the performance of staff are evaluated and people are promoted, disciplined, and hired on the basis of the performance they have. I think at the heart of addressing the ballooning wage bill is 2 or 3 things that I don't think that PSC is addressing. The first thing that PSC is not addressing is, in light of the 2010 constitution, there were functions that were shifted to the county government. We still have duplicity. We still have people who are in the same positions, both at the national and the county level. We haven't seen the reduction in the number of staff in the Ministry of Agriculture, despite the fact that some functions were transferred to the Ministry to counties. We haven't had the same thing as health. So we have people who essentially should have moved to counties, still at the national level and also at the county level. So we've increased our civil service infrastructure, and that needs to be dealt. And I don't think that putting people on contract will address it. The second thing is what you said in your opening statement, which is the runaway corruption. At the heart of this is, for example, people being employed through not following the right procedure. At the heart of this is elements of ghost workers. At the heart of this is people being employed on the basis of nepotism. And those are the things that we need to address. Lastly, Debarl, if we need to move to moving away from permanent and pensionable to contracting, a legitimate policy shift, it requires much more robust conversation. I don't think that PSC can wake up and say, from the 1st of July, we will not employ people at the lower level except on permanent and pensionable. What is even worse, Debarl, the reason why people at the higher level were being employed on contracts is because they were the head of the institution and they were fewer. Now you are reversing and telling young people that as young people, when you get in, we are the ones who will employ on contracts. Lastly, Debarl, you know, when you employ people on permanent and pensionable, because of the security of tenure, yes, it has implications on how much you pay them. When you employ me on a short-term contract, then the amounts of money must actually take into account the fact that I do not have security of tenure. I will leave after a short period of time. That's why when you hire a consultant, their daily rates will be higher than if you had an employee, because they'll be there for a short time. So I don't think that the Public Service Commission, is addressing the right problem. They claim that they're addressing productivity, yet they are addressing issues of sustainability of the wage bill. Number 2, I don't think they're addressing it correctly. And number 3, I think that they are rushing this policy shift without adequate consultation.
So is this just maybe a fig leaf that is trying to cover a lot of issues underneath as far as pension is concerned? Because also, as you mentioned, we have the Auditor General revealing that, and this was a report that was tabled yesterday, that 67.8 billion shillings were irregularly paid to pensioners because of anomalies also in the pension management information system used by the department to process and pay pension. That is at the back page of a Daily Nation. And insiders may have used weakness in the pension management system to pull off the fraud. A lot of fraud is happening. People who deservedly should be getting this pension are not getting the monies for the longest time.
I think the reality, Debarl, is that, and we've discussed this on, many times on this show, is that we have a financial crunch in the country. So everybody is trying to look for solutions. But I think in the process of looking for solutions, let's not take quick fixes. Let's be much more long-term, let's be much more robust, let's be much more thoughtful in the kind of solutions we take.
I think it's need to I think the ball game has changed. You know, we're looking at the people who are not getting into, whether it's private sector or in government. And by the young people are very keen to work for government. The ones are here. These guys are in gig economy. These guys, the issues of pension don't come into place. They're very clear. Gig economy, I can be working there, but they are delivering. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to change the ball game. What I'm very clear in my mind, I don't think I would say I put any correlation. And probably something we can look at. I don't think there's a correlation between the wage bill and the on contract. There's none. I think the heart of the matter is the issue of productivity.
Is it the issue of productivity truly? Yeah, you say for the millennials this will be a good one because at least you have an exit term after 3 years. You know, it's renewable. Here. So for them that they don't want really to stay over and you know, a pension, that will be a good thing for the millennials as well. But
okay, for me, what my view is that one, times are really changing, and the social fabric and all these issues are changing, and this must be reflective as to what is going on even policy. Now, if you look at employment, we have got 3 ways in which people can be employed. The traditional permanent and pensionable one, then we have got the term contracts, and then we have got the casuals. Now, the issue of the term contracts, they're actually working in government, especially the CEOs, they're on contract, fixed term contract, you have got performance indicators, what you must be able to comply with. I know other constitutional commissions, they're supposed to be, yeah. So the question is, that by the time this policy is being implemented, I presume that maybe a certain study may have been done to show the pros and the cons of having people on contract. Mm-hmm. But one thing I want to disagree with, I doubt whether this is the way to maintain the wage bill, the ballooning wage bill. Mm-hmm. What government needs to look into, like what my friend has said, is that with the enactment of the Constitution and the distribution of functions, you realize there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap in terms of mandates. There's a lot of overlap between the national government and the county government. So that one needs to be sorted out. Absolutely. And then we also have the issues of ghost workers and the usual governance challenges that we normally have, yes. Yeah, based on the culture that we have and all that stuff. Also, we must also not lose sight of the fact that when the Constitution came in, it brought in very many offices, and that meant that many people have to be. So it may require at some point that maybe we have to look at that aspect of the constitutional dispensation so as to see whether the workforce can be managed from that particular level. Now, I agree with Collins is that when you want to remove the security of tenure, there's a cost attached to that. And I am not very sure that the math is really making sense. If you're having, if you're employing 10 people on permanent and pensionable, and you're employing 10 people on contract, knowing that you'll be able to pay them a gratuity at the end of their contract period, I doubt whether that one is going to save. That one is going to save money when you look at it in that particular aspect. Yes. Mm. Now, what the Auditor General is raising on issues of pension and all that, those are frauds. In the event that even if we get into, in the event that we get into the contract arrangement, in fact, even that fraud is likely to be bigger. So the question is this: address that fraud.
Address the fraud.
Because after 3 years, you must pay me that.
Yeah, after 3 years, now you'll be paying the pension that you're paying somebody after 60 years. It will be paid in form of gratuity over very many years.
But also, as we're winding up, just to highlight another issue that we have with the pension is the fact that there's no pool where the government is actually tapping for this particular funds. We have every year governments, you know, getting these particular monies to pay the pensions from the budget. Why hasn't there actually over time been a pool where the government can tap to pay pensioners their money? And this, I think, is a problem that we're having with the pension scheme itself, looking at the broader aspect of it, because the government cannot sustain. That's why they increased also the years from where? 50, was it 55 to 60?
Yeah, 55 to 60.
Yeah, because there is no money. So it was not really that they want us actually to be working, because we're good workers.
I think now, you know, this is confusion that that is within government. You realize that in other private sectors and parastatals, you realize that they have got independent pension schemes, and they actually don't have this problem at the end of at the time the retirement is. And then traditionally we've seen the NSSF and the frauds that have been involved in the NSSF and all that. But the moment whereby there is no plan that this money should be kept maybe in the pool, as you've said, over time, so that as at the time somebody retires, you don't need to go to budget for purposes of meeting this particular cost or this expense, then there we have a problem.
Thank you.
And that is a question of planning.
Thank you. Let's say from
when you spend more than you earn, you will have the problems we're having over pension. You know, the reality about NSSF and Retirement Benefit Authority was to ensure that we save in the long term for a rainy day. I think we've just been here over the last few weeks when we were discussing that a lot of government agencies now deduct pension and deduct even tax and do not remit. This eventually have implications at the end, where you wake up and find that Collins is retiring, and over the last 40 years, you've been saving some money for him, both from his contributions and from employers' contribution, but you've been ghost saving. You haven't been keeping it. Then you must be able to release money every year. It is not unsustainable, because if I give you 2,000 in 1980, that amount of money will require 20,000 in 2010. And that's at the heart of our problems. We must be able to ensure that monies that are available for pension are put there in the long term, and that we reduce the leakages that happen in terms of getting them out through the wrong ways.
Yes, I just set up in an example where we had an institution, and I won't say which institution. At the start, they were difficult. They could not meet statutory obligations. Somebody else came, the whole game changed. On time, no arrears. Another one came, we are back into here. So it's that management of that system. And I think what I'm saying across government.
Don't say the institution.
I won't say the
across the institution.
Across government, across private sector, we need that seriousness in management of this resource.
Thank you. Thank you, Stanley Manduku, who is an expert on law governance. Thank you for coming through. Also, we thank you, Collins Odote, who is an environmental lawyer, also columnist with the Business Daily. We thank you. I also want to thank you, Dr. Gituro Wanaina, who is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi, and also an expert on corporate governance as well. And the issue we've not really discussed is also what is NSE and the pay packs also for the CEOs as well. You've touched on the pension, but because of interest of time, we didn't do that. I want to thank you nonetheless. But allow me just to read one or two tweets. We have Governor The Dreamer saying the modern work world requires tremendous flexibility. Anticipate working in different positions and different organizations. Expect startups, disruptive innovations, reorganizations, and moving on to new adventures. Grow and change. We have also George Kisuni saying, please stop making an example of Coca-Cola in matters of disclosures, as it is private entity, where government is a public one, I think. This is to Stanley. Was it Stanley? Also, we have Kaikai Kulabusia saying, we haven't even solved the problems with asbestos, chromated copper arsenic, that is CCA poisoning, that has been with us for the last 4 decades, and now we want to subject the citizens to another coal poisoning. We can't circumvent the constitution. This is what Daktari is saying there. Still, asbestos is a big problem. People who are living in Umoja and they had asbestos, are they subjected also to still the environmental hazards of this as well? Thank you for your valued company. You've been watching In the Market here on AM Live.